Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and now Blue Sky at Hawk Blogger. And it is time for another Seahawks Saturday with Jeff Simmons. We missed real Hawk Talk this week. I feel like naked to not have had a real Hawk Talk conversation. We did not have a chance to digest the game more with the crew, and we did not get to do predictions. So we will get to all that. We're going to pack a lot into this show. Jeff, are you buckled in? You ready?
I'm ready. I'm glad everyone's got their power back, and it seems like most people have their power back. I was following what's going on, so man, it sounded like it was crazy down there.
It's still pretty widespread. They released an announcement that I think a lot of folks may not get their power back till Monday.
Oh, crap.
So I mean, you're talking about back in 2006, there was a really crazy windstorm that happened right around the holidays, and we were without power for over a week, and that was as bad as I saw it. But this is right up there. So for folks that, if you don't have power, you're probably not listening. Maybe you have good cell reception. You're watching on your phone. Hopefully everybody's bundled up. They got a fireplace. They got whatever they need to stay warm, and hopefully we can give you a distraction, if nothing else, for the next few hours. Jeff, this is the type of show where I actually feel the need. Like, I wish I had a producer, because there's enough stuff that I want us to cover that I'm gonna probably forget things. I'm probably gonna mismatch stuff, but I'm usually a vibe-based show. We just kind of go with the flow, but there's a lot to cover, and so off the top, I want to cover something that has nothing to do with the Seahawks, and I want to get your take on this. So I feel like people that make microwaves and people that make dishwashers and maybe even refrigerators, why do the tones when they're done with something need to be so shrill and so judgmental? And then so repetitive. Like, if you miss the microwave and you have to go run and do something, and it just comes back and it's just griping at you that you have not opened the door. Why does it need to be that judgmental, man?
I don't know. When you leave your fridge open for 5 seconds or 10 seconds, do you get that beeping?
Yes. It's a nagging thing, man.
Like, if I'm cooking and I need to have the fridge open, and I'm not going to just keep shutting it and open it, it drives me crazy. I don't know. I don't know if they want to be as I don't know. I can't even think of the word. It's irritating. It's like the most annoying beeping.
I feel like they do research on what is the most annoying noise that sounds just like a very naggy, shrill noise. And, why can't it just say, in this day and age, why can't it just say, did you forget something? It could just talk to us at this point, right? Something simple. But that was the most important thing. I think we're going to spend the bulk of the show on that. The other thing that I got to show you, dude. So I've talked to you about JK Boots and everyone else about JK Boots. I got my pair. I got to say, so let me show these to you. These came yesterday. Ooh, we're going the wrong direction.
It's pretty badass.
They are gorgeous, dude. Bison leather. These are the Forefront Bison Canyon boots. My first thought when I opened them up, you get this huge wafting of leather. You could just tell how good the quality is. And then I put them on and I'm like, I'm just not worthy. These things are legit. I don't think I've ever owned a pair of shoes this nice before. They are really, really nice. Hopefully we'll have to get you in a pair at one point.
So George Kittle was saying this year that the media, especially the Niners media, have terrible shoe game.
Yes.
So I think he went around and sent them a bunch of shoes, and there was a bit with Grant where he guessed exactly where Grant got his shoes. I think it was Cole Haan. And unfortunately, you're not going to see George Kittle again this year. But man, I wonder what his take would have been if he saw you in those boots. You might have had some good shoe game.
I mean, they were like, which do you think makes sense? I'm like, I don't know. You guys know this. They kind of picked these out, and they've been making them for 6 weeks. like handmade. They're like not off the shelf. They just like literally like, oh, we're gonna make you a pair of boots. And for folks that have not already used the code HawkBlogger, they're doing Black Friday deals already and like big enough discounts that if you use code HawkBlogger, you may see that there's no additional discount because it doesn't, you don't get 10% on top of 40%. But I will tell you that you still, if you use the code, you will get a chance to win the Seahawks themed pair of boots. You will also be contributing to the Wildland Firefighters Foundation. And when there's opportunity for that to be an additional discount, it will apply. So you always want to make sure you use code HawkBlogger when you're shopping over there at jkboots.com. I even had to watch a video how to tie my boots. I'll admit it. And I didn't know what to do with the laces. I'm like I got a lot to learn. I've got to make sure I don't totally dad these boots into like where nobody wants to wear them. They're like, oh no, if he's wearing them, I'm not wearing them. That's a real possibility.
Just like don't FaceTime Isaac and ask him how to tie your boots. You'll never get over that one.
No. Well, you know, there's so many places to go with this, Jeff, and I've certainly got a bunch on my mind. We're going to talk about, the title of the show is Defending John Schneider. We will spend a bunch of time on that. We're not going to start with that topic. I'm curious, but what's top of mind for you before I get into my prepared topics? What's top of mind for you right now?
The 49ers.
Okay. That's top of mind for me too. Yeah.
Like so much of the last few years has been just worrying about this 49ers team winning the championship, and they had such good teams. And I remember just our reaction last year when we both watched week 1 and we're like, holy crap, these guys are unstoppable. And again, I've been kind of predicting their sort of demise this year, but I never thought it'd be a point where like they don't make the playoffs. And then like even last week where like I don't think we could just take it for granted. The Seahawks won in San Francisco. Like not only did they beat them, they won there. And now it comes out that Brock Purdy can't even play this week. He hurt his shoulder. Nick Bosa's got hurt again. And it's like, holy crap. This looks like the end of the road for this thing. And I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. They might finish last in the division. I don't know how bad Purdy's hurt, but this is happening a lot faster. Like I've made the comparison all year. You've heard it so many times from me to that 2015 Seahawks team. They at least won a playoff game, got to the second round. They got hot at the end of the year. I thought that's what ultimately was going to happen to San Francisco this year. This is happening a lot faster than I thought it might.
Well, yeah, I am looking right now at an ESPN bet article from April 2nd, 2024 that has their win totals projected for the coming season. And they had the 49ers as tied with the Chiefs for the highest win total projection at 11.5 wins. Mike Clay, who does his win projections, had them as the second highest rated with 12.3 projected wins. And they had them as the odds-on favorite, plus 500 to be the Super Bowl winner, ahead of the Chiefs. And as you look at the 49ers schedule the rest of the way, they are 5-5 right now. Do you see them beating either the Packers or the Bills on the road?
I was very curious to see that Packers game this week, but with Purdy out, no, I think the Packers. I think you got to go. And then the Bills next week, I think you got to go 0-2 there.
Yeah, so that's 5-7. Then they're home against the Bears. I think they get that one.
Yeah, me too.
Let's make it 6-7. Then they're home against the Rams. That's a prime time. I think that's a Thursday night game. What do you think is going to happen there?
I like the Niners in that game. I like the home team in the short week, but it depends on Bosa and Purdy.
Let's give them that game, 7-7. Then they go to the Dolphins 10 days later. What do you think there?
I think they lose that game.
Interesting. I think I give them a win in that game. I'm still not the Dolphins. I just
they're soft.
They're soft, man.
Yeah.
I just don't know if I see it. But let's be generous and give
them.
Okay,
let's give them the win. Let's give them.
They get to 8-7. Then they're home against the Lions.
That was supposed to be like the game of the year, and now it's like I think the Lions crushed them.
Yeah. So let's. I agree. I think it's 8-8. Like, am I right?
Yeah,
No.
that'd be 8-8. Then there's one game left, I
And
guess.
then there's one game left. They're at Arizona. I mean, so we were pretty generous there, and I don't know if I see a path to 10 wins for them, really.
And it's crazy because if you would have given me truth serum last week, I would have said the Niners are going to win the division. There's no doubt in
Mm-hmm.
my mind before the game. And it wasn't just the loss to Seattle. I thought Seattle did a lot but the fact that Bosa got hurt and now Purdy's hurt. Bosa, like you saw the difference when he was on and off the field. McCaffrey right now, I don't know if he's going to kind of work into it, but he doesn't look like himself. And then their age is starting to show. George Kittle's banged up. Trent Williams doesn't look like the same player. And if Purdy's shoulder is hurt the rest of the year, there's just and Deebo Samuel looked bad last. He looked slow.
Mm-hmm.
He was non-impactful. And then you're just left wondering, like, what do they really have here? They've had a really good rookie class, but so much has been about that core of all pros. And what made everyone a lot of people who are like, this could end quickly is that there's a lot of age there. And now there's a lot of injury there. And if now you had Purdy and Bosa who are in peak ages, adding to their group of older players that Kittle didn't play last week. Trent Williams didn't look like himself. There's plays
Mm-hmm.
where the Seattle D-line gets after those guys or they win in the run game. There's just not that core of guys right now, even though they hit on that rookie class. So, yeah, if you're honestly evaluating what they have on the field, it's different what they've had the last 2 years where they just had a way better roster than everyone else at the right ages.
Yeah, it's not an explosive offense anymore. I mean, I really like Juwan Jennings, and I think
He's good.
He's a good X. He's a 4.7 40 guy. He is not going to stretch the field. He is going to be a physical, bodying kind of receiver. Who do they have that stretches the field? Like,
It's not Ricky Pearsall.
no, Pearsall was like that was one of the bigger surprises. I honestly had to double check that he played in the game.
No catches.
I mean, he was just a non-factor. And you know, it kind of occurs to me, Jeff, because we're going to talk about this when we get into the John Schneider stuff. I mean, their rookie class is good this year, but it almost feels like the 2022 Seahawks to some extent in terms of when you peel away some of their blue chip talent, even though they have a solid rookie class, it doesn't feel like that dynamic of a team. And like, what did you have? You had the guys you mentioned, Trent Williams being dominant. I think that is one of the biggest storylines. And I've been hammering on this since the offseason. I just think he's in that moment of decline. I would not be surprised if he retires after this season. Nick Bosa injured again. He has had injury problems. George Kittle aging, injured again. Deebo Samuel looks cooked. I love that Grant Cohen's named him the Spork. I think that is such a great nickname for him. Brandon Ayuk signed to a major deal, major knee injury. You may really regret, like, basically as soon as you signed him, you may regret that deal. And then Brock Purdy now, second throwing arm injury in his first 3 seasons. That's a concern, man. Like, and on top of that, what's been their biggest advantage? Kyle Shanahan and scheming people open. They're not really doing that. And one of the things they were doing a lot are these tight formations and things off of that for years, kind of made that in vogue. But now they're kind of getting blitzed out of it because when you do these tight formations and you bring the receivers in close, teams can just send the nickel corner like from a really close position and blitz after. We saw Tyrese Knight do that to Brock Purdy and get right in his face on one play last week. So I think they're spinning a little bit right now.
Yeah, and kind of the knock that's been going on with like kind of the film guys is that Shanahan doesn't have kind of the adjustment rate now when people know his scheme. And people have been very good at, like, if he's been ahead of the game for a long time. Just the way he's schemed guys open in the run game, and there just hasn't been a lot of instances where it's looked like that this year. And a lot of people think it's just, and people are curious to see when Shanahan has a different quarterback, whether his offense kind of becomes more scheme friendly and whether it's because they were such a dominant play action team over the years. And that's been like the hallmark of the Gary Kubiak, Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan. And I don't know if it's been more faith in Purdy, but they've really gone away from it. And
Mm-hmm.
Seattle's numbers against play action this year, because of how bad their linebackers were, have been really bad. And so I was surprised they didn't attack that more. And really, that's just been such a hallmark of even like watching the Texans with Gary Kubiak and Matt Schaub and the play action and the sprint outs and all that stuff. It's kind of gone. They become more of a drop back team, which David Lombardi was slamming down as like, this means they love Brock Purdy. And it feels like they've kind of lost themselves in that
Mm-hmm.
fact.
Mm-hmm.
And they haven't had the counterpunch to it, which has been shocking because that's what Shanahan's so good at. And it's been like you mentioned, we hear about the lack of separation. We didn't see the wide open guys. It's just not there right now, and they're struggle. Every game has been kind of a struggle for them, even though they put up some good numbers. And I
I
think it
love
kind
it.
of bakes down to that.
I love it so much. I love it so much. And to be there for the first time in that stadium, half empty, dude, in a game that
That's crazy.
mattered a lot for them. And I don't buy this. Well, no one wants to go see the Seahawks play. Like, okay, who would not want to go see your team beat up another team? That's a fun game to go to if that's what you think is going to happen. So I don't know, man. I think that franchise is in a challenging state. And I got something for you. First of all, I want you to write your 2015 article. I think you got to put pen to paper on that. And I got another thing for you related to that. As we are talking here, you've talked about all the parallels. What about the potential parallel of reduced scheme advantage? Like Pete Carroll's, single high, cover three, not like getting like understood by the league, and they lost that advantage and they were just not that dominant anymore. Is Shanahan searching for his next scheme advantage because the one he has maybe is eroding?
I've never even put that together. And that was kind of the year where things start to tail off, and as the team became more quarterback centric. And the thing that the 2015, in the second half of the year that year, that's when Russ and Doug Baldwin had that massive explosion that brought the team back from 500 to like Super Bowl contender. And Purdy started the year pretty well, but I don't think their second half is going to look like that. And maybe John Jennings is that Doug Baldwin kind of guy, and he was great on Sunday. But man, that even adds to the story even further. And like the parallels all year have been shocking. And like last week's game, I said it on Sunday, reminded me so much of that game the Seahawks had with Carolina that year, where the Seahawks always beat Carolina. And then the last like minute of the game, Greg Olsen scores a touchdown right down the seam. Kind of felt like that Geno touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of like, ugh, we're not like they got us. And that one had to hurt. And you're right.
They're
I
melting
bet.
down, and I'll just say this: I don't know. People calling for Kyle Shanahan's job. I gotta say, like, I hope they manage to convince them to do it and ownership blinks, because you're gonna have a hard time finding a better option. Like Kyle Shanahan, as much as I have some things I don't like about him, he's a damn good head coach.
Oh yeah, we clown on him for the Super Bowl like meltdowns and how many times they've choked away. But I think he's a top three coach in the league. And like even when McVay was kind of coming up, and I was always kind of the guy that was like, I think Shanahan's the dude.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's awesome. I think the ability to. So listen, if you guys think he sucks and Grant wants to push that angle, I'm all here for it. If you want to send Kyle Shanahan to the AFC, please do, please do. But yeah, there's a lot of chatter. I know Grant said before the year, kind of ownership was kind of ticked at some of the decisions they made and some of the way they spent money, especially with the Ayuk thing. And I don't know what's going to come from this season if they don't make the playoffs or they're not even close to the playoffs. I think that story's going to get louder, and I think it's absurd, but I'm here for it, man.
Well, I got a little bit of a taste for how easy Grant's job is. Will Hart, who does the shorts and reels for this show, so if you see those on YouTube or Instagram, thank Will for those. he he made a clip of me talking about how much of a trash coach Kyle Shanahan was for that cheap shot on DK Metcalf. And it went so viral. It went like 300,000 views. Like it went crazy. All you got to do is talk crap about the 49ers, and 49ers fans just so like Grant is just printing money, I think, with all his takes on the 49ers, but good for him. So a preview of what we got left to do. We got a lot to cover today. We just talked about the 49ers. I think we'll talk about the main topic here, the John Schneider discourse, and we'll set that up and spend some time on that. I've got some sound to play for you and for everybody else from Mike McDonald and from Ryan Grubb about the run game, which I think is like the next domino that needs to fall for this team. Some interesting insights there to talk about. We've got a voicemail, so everybody's excited to hear the jingle. We'll hear that a little bit later. And then we're going to spend some time previewing this Cardinals game, man. We didn't have Real Hawk Talk this week. We will talk about the Cardinals game. We'll make our picks. Like, cannot go into the game without making picks. So all that's to come. If you haven't already given the show a like and click subscribe, now is a great time to do it. We were like 70 away from hitting the 13,000 mark in subscribers. So I would love to have you join as a subscriber, join the family, and support the show. So let's talk about this. Originally I was going to, I want to do a People's Court on the John Schneider discourse. It's fun doing the People's Court. We did that for Gino. It was good. But I grew impatient. And so I've been working on this for a few days. And I think you saw, I put out like my little approval rating poll, right? This was the day before the game last week. So this was a week ago today, sorry. And I asked the same kind of presidential approval rating question. Do you approve of the job that Mike McDonald's doing as head coach? Do you approve of the job that Geno Smith is doing as quarterback? Do you approve of the job that John Schneider is doing as GM? And Jeff, I think we talked about it. I was shocked that Mike McDonald had like an 83% approval rate. Geno Smith was at 73%. This was one game after he threw 3 picks. So I thought their approval rating would be lower, especially Mike McDonald. I thought that I don't know. I've got the impression people are not that bought into him, but at least for that poll, a lot of people were supportive. But John Schneider, 31%. 31% of people approved. Almost 70% did not approve of the job he's doing. That's pretty darn low. I'm curious, like, you know the conversation that were going on last week. We talked a little bit about with the free agent moves. I assume you were probably part of that 70%, if you were voting in that poll.
Yeah, I was. I've had issues with the team build for the number of years, and just it was coming off the heels where they kind of pissed away a game that they really should have won. But at the same time, like, I've been very supportive of John's drafting, and I thought he's drafted relatively well the last 3 years. And we even did a show a couple months ago where we went through basically each pick in the last couple drafts, 22 and 23. But my issue is just I felt that their team build has not reflected how they want to play. And I've had an issue with that dating back a number of years, really since this thing kind of got away from them, starting with that 2017 draft. And so I've been frustrated. I've been frustrated that we've been a soft team. We haven't been able to play defense. We've been weak at the line of scrimmage. So last couple games have been a nice step in the right direction for me, but I'm still frustrated overall. I think given how well they've drafted, this should be a better team at this point.
Yeah, and I think there were a few things that I think you've mentioned and other people mentioned that I think was stoking some of that frustration. And let me share this as a way to show the free agent class from last year. I think this was driving a lot of frustration because when I did this poll, Jeff, this was right after literally the day after Connor Williams retired.
Yeah.
3 days after Tyrell Dodson was waived. And so I think people were like, look, like you, the GM, brought in linebackers, two starting linebackers that are no longer on the team. And they didn't even make it a full season. What are you doing? And they also, I think one of the other things that contribute to this, Jeff, is people are like, it's not. I think John Schneider's done a remarkably good job of not losing good players. There's not a lot of players through his whole 14 years where people are like, ah, man, they should have re-signed that guy. It doesn't happen that often. But last year, people were like, I wish they kept Jordan Brooks. I wish they kept Damian Lewis. And so that kind of compounded the frustration, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, I put this together and I'm curious like where you'd be aligned or different in terms of, I kind of put what I think is whether this has been a good return on investment or not. And, you know, Leonard Williams is your jewel of that free agent class. He spent all the money there. I think that's been money well spent. I'm curious your thoughts there. We won't go through one by one, but I'm just curious on that one.
No, I really like that. I didn't love the trade necessarily, but I think building defensive tackles and how Mike Macdonald wants to play, I thought if you lost him in free agency, that would have just put a complete egg on the head of that trade. And I think just to set up the Mike Macdonald kind of spine of the defense, I thought I was I had no problem with that signing, and I think they've gotten pretty good return on it. I think he's a really stable player for them, and you saw last week their defensive line just take over the game a few times, just the front four. And it was Leonard, it was Byron Murphy, and if they don't have Leonard Williams in there, there's no replacement for him in free agency. And what if you don't get Byron Murphy?
Mm-hmm.
Like they were one domino away, and then what do you? Then you're back to where you were last year at defensive tackle. So you had to sign him.
So by the way, this article is up on hawkblogger.com, so people can read the whole thing on their own time as well. But the next two to me are worth spending a minute on. So I've got Noah Fant as TBD. You know, I was not a fan of that signing from the very beginning. My tendency was to say this is not a good return. I could not quite get myself to say no because I think it's a multi-year deal and we still don't know. Like, I don't know if we've really seen the offense as it's intended yet. And I don't know if he's going to end up blossoming. I think it's unlikely. I think I'd say 70% chance this will be not a good signing, but I left it as TBD. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, that's probably fair. I probably put it as a no. I was with you. I didn't like that signing from the moment it happened. I just didn't think it really fit. I thought that money could have been allocated to some of the positions I've talked about, and kind of the player Fant didn't really fit to me with like the McDonald kind of. So I'd probably put no, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And for me, this is where I think you could have reallocated money and gone after a John Simpson or one of the slightly above bottom barrel guards.
Yeah.
And I think I personally do value guard over tight end. And especially I just don't know that Noah Fant has demonstrated that he is a difference making tight end. So that's one I think we see relatively eye to eye. Rayshon Jenkins, the discourse on Rayshon Jenkins right now, I think is really interesting. He had some really bad recent games. He had an excellent start to the year. For me, I'm really eager to see him behind this new front seven. I think he could be a very different player in this defense than he was when everybody in front of him was going every which way. But a lot of people will be like, oh, that hasn't worked out. I don't see it that way. I think it's definitely a TBD. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's been up and down. Like the Denver game, I thought he was really, really good. I thought Miami game, he was pretty good. But then his angles on run plays start to kind of erode. And I don't know how much, like some of the big plays in some of the Detroit, San Francisco, the little stretch there, he was really looking rough. And especially just angles in the run game. And you're right, the linebackers were not helping him. They were leaving him at the dry. So it seems, I don't know if you would know better than me, but I think Kobe Bryant's probably played well enough where he's going to be the primary two deep safety. And then maybe you put Jenkins as that third safety, kind of what Kayvon Wallace was supposed to be doing. I think that's a role that can really accentuate him. So I'm very curious to see. I think that actually adds a boost to their defense. Like Ty Okada played a lot more last week. And I think the skill level between Rayshon and Okada is pretty one-sided towards Jenkins. And I think You saw Okada get away from Purdy and like jump in the air. Like that was a key moment that like, he kind of blew. Like I think Jenkins could be a really good fit in that role. So I think the TBD is perfectly. I think I want to see these last 7 games where he's in this new role. I'm assuming that. I don't know what's going to happen with Bryant, but I think the 3 safety package now could look pretty good. So I think that's going to help this defense for sure.
Yeah, I think Jenkins is going to add a lot of physicality to a team that is leaning into that dimension. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. But so I've got that as a TBD. I personally think that's going to end up being a yes, but I understand a lot of people think it's the opposite. George Fant, we liked that move. It was a smart move. We kind of advocated for it before it even happened. He's just not able to play anymore. I think I don't expect him to finish his career. I think his career might be over.
Yeah, like I'm not going to knock them for that one. I thought that was an objectively good move. It's been injury. It's not been poor performance or anything like that. He got injured in the first quarter against Denver, and when he came back, he got injured right away again. And so I don't think there was any like metrics that would have predicted that. Like based on he's at the age where it's not like his body trends down. There's a lot of older offensive linemen. That's just an unfortunate part of reality. People get hurt in football, and they got bad luck there because their right tackle play has been so bad this year. And if he was just competent, I think their offensive line would have looked a lot different. And I think I'm not going to knock them for that one. So I'm with you. I don't know what's going to happen with him, but I think that's bad luck more than anything else.
Yeah, I think the process was good.
Yeah.
Results not. Jerome Baker, Tyrell Dodson, we all know, certainly not good return for those guys. Connor Williams retires, not good return there. Personally, I think the process was good to bring him in. I think potentially it could have been really good. And again, kind of like the George Fant thing, you rolled the dice, didn't work out. But I think I was supportive of that move. Pharaoh Brown, I think, has really been a disappointment. Man, the bar was not high there. Just be a really good blocking tight end. He hasn't been that. I don't know if maybe the injury he suffered in preseason in his foot has been contributing to like lower play, but I just have not been impressed, man. That should have been like a pretty straightforward one. I actually was supportive of the process there. The results I put on the player more than I put on Schneider.
Yeah, Schneider said he was one of the best blocking tight ends in the league. I think on one of his the draft shows he was doing, and I haven't seen anything close to that. And I don't know if they're relying too much on PFF grades. I know that was kind of what took them to Dodson and Baker's coverage grades. I don't know what his blocking grade was last year, but I don't know if it's injury related. I have not seen the physicality that I would want in a blocking tight end. I've not seen a lot of impactful blocks. And so he just right now looks like a slow, average blocking tight end that hasn't brought much to the table, for being honest.
Yeah. Nick Harris, they signed to be a backup center. They traded him. Not great return on that investment. So that's a no.
You could probably
Jonathan
argue
Hankins. What's that?
You could probably argue it was a good return.
Why would you say that?
Well, they turned that into a draft pick.
A draft pick?
Yeah. For like
That's
a veteran
fair.
minimum signing, I think that's a good return.
All right. I like it when you argue against me in general, so that's good. We'll take that. Jonathan Hankins, Kayvon Wallace. By the way, this is in descending order of contract value, in case people are wondering how I got to this ordering. Jonathan Hankins, Kayvon Wallace, I put them both as yes, good return. These are like $2 million, $1.5 million deals for guys that have been playing meaningful roles on your defense. I don't think these are the guys that you want. Like that, I wouldn't say Jonathan Hankins is a guy that you want to build around, but I think he's been a fine 1-year stopgap. I would have liked better, but I think the return's been fine.
Yeah, he hasn't played as well as he has the last few years. And what happened with Hankins, he got too much playing time because of the injury situation with Murphy and Williams. And when he got all those snaps, he was really exposed. He looked really bad in some of those really bad run defense games where he was just playing snaps at a level he just, frankly, probably shouldn't handle at this point of his career. So overall, I don't think you can argue it's been a bad return. He hasn't played it as well as would have hoped, but the price was so small, and they clearly needed the depth at defensive tackle. So I'm with you. Kayvon Wallace has been fine. I'm not sure. I put a yes. I think he's more of a TBD. He hasn't really It's been okay. Like he was signed for like the veteran minimum, I think. So
Yeah.
it's hard to argue no.
Yeah.
But unless it's like really special teams value, there just hasn't been much there. And yeah, I think I would agree with you on most of that.
So then wrapping it up, Artie Burns is on IR. He's every year they've brought him back, and he was playing well when he's on the field, but he's injured, so you can't say that's worked out. Laviska Shenault,
I've got that yes.
You got that as a yes.
Yeah, he ran a kick return back for a touchdown. That's worth whatever they paid him.
My bar is a little higher than that, but
it's worth like the league minimum.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I remain in the category of thinking that there's more there than they've been able to unlock. But fair. I mean, when we get down to this level, I guess it just doesn't really matter whether it was good return or not. Like these are really low priced investments. Although one of them is the second cheapest position that our free agent that they signed was Laken Tomlinson. I'm not sure people really realize how little they spent on him. It was like $1.3 million. For me, they've got a good return. I know that I am fighting. I am Jon Snow standing against the oncoming horde on that one. I think people have been so damaged by what they've seen from Laken Tomlinson at times that they have blinded themselves to what has been better than league average guard play for $1.3 million. And what people also don't realize is that league average guard play is really bad right now. So I think that was a positive return. I don't think it was necessarily the one that I'd want, but I think that it's a good return on what they spent.
Yeah, it's two different conversations for me. If it's whether they got a good return, absolutely. The guy started every game, and they paid him nothing. That's a good investment. Is he the player I would have identified, or would I think he's a good player to make that move? No. I just think it's too low ceiling, and when he looks bad, he looks as bad as any player. Like some of the whiffs he's had that like caused some of the safeties in that first game, and some of the missed blocks. Like he's a pretty below average starter, but again, to get a guy who started every game, who's giving you snaps all year at $1.3 million, I don't think you can argue it's not a good return on investment. Whether it was a good signing, whether they should have done that, or whether he should be a backup, that's a better question. But yeah, I would put yes too. I think that is, and he has been playing a little better lately. I will acknowledge that. But overall, I just think he's too mediocre. That's not who I would have targeted.
Yeah, I mean, I got to challenge that a bit because you and I have been advocating for signing the mediocre players. I think what you and I are saying is there were clear deficiencies. The floor for Laken Tomlinson when he's not doing something well is low enough to just sink an offense.
Yes.
Where like even a guy like Evan Brown, who I'll just pull out, like he wasn't a game changer last year, but he wasn't a guy that was blowing games for you. He wasn't a guy that was just getting dominated at times or just a total zero. And he's going to come into town this week with the Arizona Cardinals. He got paid a little bit more, like $2.3 million or something like that. I think the Seahawks would be better off with Evan Brown at left guard than Laken Tomlinson.
Yeah,
now
I agree.
So like it's not about like go sign the best guy out there necessarily. I think it's a judgment call about which are the guys that are going to be the highest floor. So I've heard you say, and not just you, but others, like one of the real challenges in your evaluation of Schneider is free agency, like pro personnel.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit. And I want to talk about some of the past free agent classes as well. We're not going to go into as much detail, but I want to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think a GM, a lot of people just judge GMs on evaluating players, and there's a lot more to it. You have to manage two different departments. You have the college department and you have the pro department, and then you got to run basically both departments. And I think what we're going to talk about today is some of the college evaluations, some of the pro evaluations, but I think some of the pro evaluations, you see a lot of it reflected in like the mid-tier free agency and what you can get. Are you pulling out kind of under the radar players? Are you getting value in some of your free agent signings? Are you signing people at values that no one else is doing? I think that's a big part of pro evaluations. Like anyone can go out and know Joe Thuney's a good player or Joe Thuney's a good guard. But like, and if you look at that list and some of like the under the value players, I don't think they've gotten a lot of positive return. And like we identified a lot of guys. If you listen to our shows the last few years, me and you and Nathan have identified some pretty good guys year after year. Like there was the one year you identified Shaq Barrett. Like that's a good pro evaluation where you say if you get this guy in a different system, he can take a like I really like John Simpson, who I think's played pretty well with on a bad Jets team, who played with McDonald. I don't know if McDonald liked him or not, but I thought his price point, I thought left guard was a big hole. And I think if when we went back and looked at free agency year by year a couple of weeks ago, it was not a great list of names. And I think that's been a hole in their process. And I know they don't want to be John comes from Ted Thompson. He trained him. He has a lot of Ted Thompson qualities in how he approaches free agency. And that was a pretty sustainable approach. Ted Thompson frustrated a lot of Packers fans, but I think we've seen over the years you need to have a balance of kind of dipping into free agency. And I understand John's philosophy on it. And for the most part, the philosophy is right. But I don't think they've made enough quality identifications of those kinds of players if you're going to have that approach.
So I think if you look at this past season, that rings true. Even there, I'm going to come back and share what I think is a plausible explanation about why. And so, but before I do that, you got to say, well, if I'm going to make the case that maybe it's just something specific or acute to this season, we got to look back at least the last two classes. And I think most people they look at this class and they're like, not a great return in most places. Then they think about last year and they're like, Draymond Jones, you spent a bunch of money on him. He's not going to be a good return. I think there's almost no chance that he will ever be a good return.
Yeah, and I actually won't knock them too hard on that one. That's a complicated situation that happened there. They really wanted Zach Allen. And Zach Allen went to Denver because of Vance Joseph. And what I had heard is they'd offered more money than Denver did. And Zach Allen's now become one of the best defensive tackles. What happens in free agency and why John doesn't like it and why is when you're geared up to sign a guy and you budgeted that money and you lose a guy, if you've ever been in like an auction draft in fantasy, what happens when you lose a bid, you spend the money right away. And sure, you could say like he should have been more patient. I think Draymond Jones was probably the next guy on their list. They kept their tabs on him and they ended up beating Cleveland, who wanted him. And they paid what it cost to get him. I think that was all reaction of that. I don't knock them too hard on that one.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do. And they say, oh, there's another situation that hasn't worked out. I'd look at last year's class and I'd say Julian Love, it's been a fantastic signing.
Yeah, that was a good signing. That's
fantastic signing, great value and great upside. A young player that's now basically a captain and a leader on your defense. Jaron Reed, we weren't super excited about that signing. Let's be honest. Like you and I and the crew were like, oh man, this guy's a low ceiling, doesn't do a lot of interesting things. I think he's like, especially for the money that they spent on a 2-year deal, they've got significantly more return than what they invested there. He's tied with Leonard Williams for the highest amount of pressures on this team on the interior of the line. By the way, the person who's leading the Seahawks in pressures this year, Draymond Jones.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would guess that. So I think Julian Love, Jaron Reed were very good signings last year.
Yep.
I thought the Bobby Wagner signing was a good signing last year. I thought you got very competent. I know that there's issues and there's reasons why he left and they didn't bring him back. I thought that for the money they spent, I think they got a good return on the Bobby Wagner deal. I think the Evan Brown deal that they had at center was a good signing, worked out well. Mario Edwards, a name that most people have forgotten, but was a good return for what they spent on him. Artie Burns last year was a good corner for them and a good return for not much. So, I mean, the guys that didn't work out, I mean, you can even say Drew Lock was like, I said no because they spent like $4 million. I don't think he's worth that. He did win them a game.
They traded for him.
Sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, and he did win them the Eagles game. So, I mean, you could kind of put that in the positive too. Devin Bush, I said no.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's a no.
And Frank Clark, I said no.
That was an in-season move because of injury to Nuosu. I don't.
So I feel like it's not a disastrous free agent class where you look at that and you're like, these guys just really blew it. Do you feel differently?
No, like I'm not gonna give them too much credit for Bobby Wagner. Like that was a situation where like it's you're not making like a tough evaluation there. Like Bobby wanted to come back. They had a clear need at linebacker. I know Pete wanted to like kind of put that fence back together. So I'm not gonna give them too much. But Julian Love, yeah, that helps the case because that's the kind of free agency I'm talking about, where you identify a guy who's kind of slipped through the cracks, you put him in a role, and then he takes a step forward. That's a great move. I still didn't think they addressed enough at the positions offensive line, and they went to that year with that horrible defensive tackle situation. And
Mm-hmm.
Jaron Reed was a great situation. But my issue is not the individual players, it's the team building. And I think it's all
Mm-hmm.
connected. And we went into that year, they were so weak at defensive tackle, they had to make the Leonard Williams trade, which I think you can argue probably, I don't know if you can argue it worked out. The process wasn't great because they cost them a second round pick and a good draft. But I think still, even though you identified one by one, they were really weak up front in the offensive line last year. The only
Mm-hmm.
move they made was Evan Brown. And defensive tackle, Jaron Reed, again, good move. But they were left in this position where they were really thin at an important spot and they couldn't function. And they had to make that trade. And so, yes, they are not a disaster. But if you kind of keep taking these back and you get to like 2020, then
Yeah. Yeah. Fair. And so it sounds like for you, it's like positional value and prioritization is factoring in as well. So we should talk about that because I think you and I probably are similar on that one. I'll run through this really quickly, but 2022, their big free agent signing was Uchenna Nwosu.
yeah, it's an A plus.
As a fan, I know everyone's like, oh, he's injured all the time. Whatever. He was a great, like he absolutely took a step forward, leader on the team. I also 2022, Geno Smith. For my money, there has not been a better free agent signing in the NFL in the last 3 years. And you might say, well, how do you figure that? It's the most important position on the field. I think it's the best veteran contract for a quarterback in the NFL. And you've got, like, people can argue, but you've got significantly more, way more than your value. And just look from a market perspective, Daniel Jones just got cut yesterday, just got waived. Same free agent class, signed a $40 million a year deal. Geno Smith was $25 million a year. I think that was like a master stroke free agent move.
Yeah, I think that was after the 22 year. That was going into 23. So I think if you want to build the case for Schneider, I think I said at the time, I thought that was the best contract other than like the Michael Bennett, Averill, that Schneider's done, and it's been one of the better contracts in the league because there hadn't been the middle class of quarterbacks at that point. And really before like Geno, like it was either you made the Daniel Jones signing and you just paid the top of the market or you let the guy walk. And Geno was the first kind of middle market signing. And again, the Daniel Jones example, it was the same free agent class, the same decision they had to make, and they made the mistake that we were also fearful about them making with Geno. There was a lot of chalk, like there's no way Geno's going to sign for less than 40 million, and then the numbers come out and it's 25, and there wasn't a big market for Geno externally, but I thought that was probably the best free agent work John's done.
Yeah,
in really a decade, probably.
So I guess where the reason I wanted to spend a little bit of time on that is I think where folks have been just dragging Schneider on free agency. I think this past year there's issues, and I'm about to talk about why I think that might be. And then I think the past 2 seasons before, at worst, I would say it's mixed. I would not say it's been disastrous the last 2 years before. I think we can debate positional priority and who they went after, and I think that's totally fair. But as far as like the people they signed, there's definitely been some really positive moves over the last couple seasons.
Yes, I think if you look at the individual players as a whole, it's been pretty solid. I think what we've seen them struggle with, and I've seen this is not just a Schneider thing, it's been the whole pro group, is when they've made scheme changes, they have struggled to identify the correct talent to fit the scheme change. And when they brought in Clint Hurd and they had the Vic Fangio guys, the whole year was kind of like the first 22, that when that run defense really fell apart. They seem to have a mismatch of the guys they brought in to run that defense. And then the next year they tried to adjust, but they didn't really seem to adjust. And like now we're seeing some of the guys kind of emerge in different systems. And so now that McDonald's come in and they're like, okay, we need some guys to fit his system. It's another year where they kind of got that wrong. And that's where it's like, it's been a couple of years of this now defensively, but I'm hoping McDonald kind of really emphasizes this moving forward. And I think this is something they need to get better at, where they tie the front office with the coaching staff.
This is why you're so good, Jeff. This is exactly where I was going, because I think an undertold, even by us, part of what's been problematic for the last 10 years. And you can focus on the offensive line if you want to just one position group as a microcosm of this. I don't think that the personnel department and the coaching staff have been in sync. Yeah. And I don't think that they have been additive. I think that they have been kind of like personnel might bring in somebody that doesn't exactly play the way the coaching staff intends, or the coaching staff doesn't know what they want clearly enough. And so the personnel department has probably been searching. And I think that we've just ended up with like misfit parts.
Yes.
And I think people put that on the personnel department. And I think I understand why. I think behind the scenes, people don't understand how much that this is a consensus building process, and that you've got, like, I know for a fact that pretty much every GM in the NFL could tell you stories about players that they wanted to sign, they wanted to draft, that a coach on the team said no. And so that's where you get some of these stories that come out of like, we wanted that guy, blah, blah, blah. And so one of the reasons, so let me make the case about why I think that why I'm encouraged by what's happened this offseason on the free agent side. So Mike Macdonald gets hired January 31st. They hire Ryan Grubb and Adam Dirty February 13th. Free agency starts March 13th. There's not a lot of time for a coaching staff to mesh with the personnel department in that situation. The personnel department kind of has to make some educated guesses, lean a little forward. Sure, they're going to talk. Also, you hire Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff, who are coming from college ranks, who don't have like as clear of a perspective on the players in free agency because they haven't been playing against them or with them like an NFL coordinator or offensive line coach would have. So I think all those are factors that contribute to like, you're kind of taking some flyers and hoping that they work out. But if you fast forward now, Jeff, I would say that what we've seen during this season is like off-season 1.5, version 1.5. You've seen them make the trade for Roy Robertson Harris. You've seen them make the trade for Ernest Jones. You've seen them decide to let go of Tyrell Dodson and elevate Tyrese Knight. You've seen them have Josh Jobe, who was a practice squad addition in August, elevate and play well. You've seen Kobe Bryant step in at safety. So like you've seen a lot of these moves, and we've talked about it. Every single one of those has been a step forward. And so what I would make the case for is that there's a plausible reason that the reason this free agency group, like a lot of them were misses, was the situation of this particular acute offseason. And maybe for the first time in 10 years, people should actually be encouraged that it seems like the personnel department and the coaching staff are seeing eye to eye and adding players that are actually fitting the system and making the team better. Like, when's the last time we could say that many moves in a row were positive?
No, and that's why even like I have been frustrated with Schneider. I don't think it makes sense to cut ties with the GM now and replace them and kind of go through this song and dance again. I think you've got to give them an offseason together, and I think you got to see if they can build on this, because so much of this next phase for them comes down to that. So I think you're dead on there, because they have shown progress in that. Like, I thought Robertson Harris, number one, like that seemed like a guy that Baltimore would sign. Like, just a big dude who could eat space, who could be physical. Like, and it's in the last few years where they've tried to run that Vic Fangio defense, and they kept bringing these. They cycled through their entire defensive line like year over year, which is like a huge red flag, and what they've been doing with the offensive line. And so I'm really hoping this becomes a building block of this next phase, and I'm hoping this is something they identify internally, that this has been an issue for them. That is something they need to get better at, because the coaching staff and the personnel need to mesh. And like when some of the big free agent signings they made early, Sidney Rice, Robert Gallery, they were all connected to coaches on the staff. Sidney Rice was with Bevel in Minnesota. Gallery was with Cable in Oakland. And Gallery didn't work out, but those are the kind of ties you see. Really, there was only Hankins, and I thought them not bringing in a Baltimore player, that was a big red flag to me. And I didn't like that. I thought they needed someone internally to kind of teach the defense. And I'm not saying they have to do that next year, now that they've kind of taken the year, and I thought they kind of went through a rough patch because they didn't have anyone like that. And I'm hoping the personnel staff can identify better without the coaches. But yeah, this is something that we've seen better at. This needs to affect their draft. And really, this is the big picture issue I've had with them for years. I don't think their team build has reflected how the coach wants to play. And I think they lost themselves trying to appease Russell Wilson. I thought that for years.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought they really lost themselves trying to do that. I think that 2017 draft was the worst example of it. And they've kind of never got that back. And we know how Mike McDonald wants to play. We heard Schneider talk about how he wants to play. He alluded to this year them not being tough and physical enough. And so if they can build a team and the team we're playing this week, they have talent issues, but it's very clear how they want to play, and their personnel has reflected it. And that's what I want to be the next phase for the Seahawks. And if Schneider can do that, then great. But if it's still this mismatch of players that they bring in talent but doesn't really work as a team build, and like obviously the Lions are the best example of this, but the Lions clearly identified what they value. Or the Chargers with Harbaugh, like Joe Alt over Malik Neighbors. Like that is such a thing of what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this next phase has to be. And taking Murphy and Haynes, that was a Baltimore-ish draft and a linebacker. So that was a good progress. But this is what I need to see more, because the whole team for the last several years to me has not reflected how they want to play. And that's where I've been critical of the one building the team.
Folks, if you haven't given the show a like and click subscribe, please do. We're an hour in, and we're just scratching the surface. This is going to be a marathon. Get up, stretch, hit the restroom, whatever you need. We're just getting started here. I want to thank Tony Bag of Donuts for gifting 10 Hawk Blogger memberships. Appreciate you, Tony. Thank you for the generosity. Garth Knight's got a bunch of super chats. Most of these are a little off topic, but I'll just say Garth, he wants to see John Schneider defended. Appreciate that. Says he loves Mahomes for his defense of the San Francisco championship. If only Burrow could have stopped the Stafford half. Burrow needed to lose to Mahomes or to Josh Allen. Yes, I agree with you there, Garth. It says nobody hates Kyle more than San Francisco fans. San Francisco is full of educated artists who pretend to be Niners fans. By the way, I don't want hockey hair Kyle here. Yeah, I don't want Kyle here either. And then Noah Fant as a Seahawks tight end has less productional value than corn has nutritional value. Ouch, dude. Ouch.
Garth.
All right. Thank you for the super chats. So on that last point, before I get into the draft side of this, and then we're gonna touch the third rail, Jeff. We're gonna touch the third rail. It's called overdrafted and overpaid. Everyone knows what those two words mean, and we're gonna talk about that in a second, because I've got some understanding, I think enhanced understanding of what the team sees that to mean versus what fans have interpreted that to mean. I'm going to share that in a little bit. Draft, before we get there, you just talked about why you don't want Schneider to, be let go, because you want to see this chemistry continue to develop, and switching people out constantly is very disruptive to that happening. If you're trying to plant a seed and you keep changing pots, it's rerouting it. It's a challenge. So I feel the same way about Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff, which is different than a lot of folks. People it is not just the personnel department. You need some stability between the coaching. How many different OCs have we had over the last 8 years? How many different offensive line coaches have we had? Need to get some traction and stick there. So that's just a kind of an aside. But I want to switch to talk about the draft a little bit in the Schneider stuff. And I'm guessing this has not been an area you've been super critical of. We have specific players, like I was a big Dominic Pooney over Christian Haynes guy. And that's not revisionist. We've got it all on tape. But that was a little bit tough for me. I think both of us would have wanted them to take another guard instead of taking a tight end in the 4th round. Blah. There's a few of those things where you can kind of quibble with. But when I went back and I looked at his last 3 drafts, I think it's so much better than even I realized. Did you know Kenneth Walker has the most rushing yards of any player drafted in the last 3 years, more than Breece Hall, taken in the same draft? He has more touchdowns than any player drafted in the last 3 years.
And that's with one of the worst run blocking offensive lines.
Yeah. And he's missing games to injury. Like, I feel is fractional of what he will be. He's leader of the class. 14 of the 22 players that started against the 49ers were drafted in the last 3 classes. Like, and Anthony Bradford would say, well, that's not necessarily like, being a starter isn't necessarily just a good thing. But in almost every other case, it is a good thing. Charles Cross, second highest graded offensive lineman in general over the last 3 drafts. At your, cornerstone franchise left tackle. Olu Oluwatimi and Abe Lucas are now 8th and 11th on that list. Of all offensive linemen drafted in the last 3 years, the Seahawks have number 2, number 8, number 11 as of right now. Now, of course, Olu and Abe need to play more than one game this year to validate that those grades are going to stay good. But Jeff, if you and I had this conversation 3 years ago and we said, okay, we're going to end up with 2 long-term bookend tackles and a Pro Bowl caliber center, like, what would you have said? Would you sign up for that?
Yeah, I would have said you're out of your mind. Like, there's no way that's going to happen.
So now, again, it's early with Lucas and Olutimi especially, and these are just PFF grades, and PFF, there's good things and bad things, all that kind of stuff. But everyone saw what you and I saw. Those 2 were, like, forget what PFF said. If you just had the performances we saw from those 2 players for the next 3 years at center and right tackle, I think we're thrilled. We're thrilled.
Yeah, Abe Lucas looked like their best lineman right away.
Yeah. And he looked like the best lineman in as a rookie as well, by the way.
Yeah, like, as much as Cross has gotten the high PFF grades, I think when you watch the physicality of Lucas and how he did against Bosa, like, to do that coming off season-long injury in your first game, that's incredible. And, yeah, 2022, he was significantly better than Cross, in my opinion. Just in terms of, like, a run blocker, physical edge, and right away, he looked like your best lineman. And that's a huge deal. Right tackle's been a disaster spot for them this year. You talked about the pressures coming out of that spot, that side of the line. And I thought that was the most encouraging. I thought if you look at their roster coming out of 21, it was so bleak, dude. Mm-hmm. And, like, they didn't have a tackle signed up. They didn't have a corner. Russ was, like, declining. They didn't have edge rushers. So if they whiffed on these drafts, they would have been like the Titans right now. And we're not we're not in first place or anything like that, but they had the potential to, like, I remember after that year, you're just like, this is going to be bleak, man.
Yeah.
And it looked like it. And the Russ trade and the way they've handled those picks. So to come out of that draft with 2 tackles and so many other positions, if Lucas is legit and can stay on the field, I think this really elevates Schneider's draft grade for sure.
I think he and Olu are pivotal to how you evaluate this. And I think the fact that they've even shown, like, how often we just, like, show us a flash, show us that you have the potential. We've already seen the flash. Now it's about sustaining it. So I think the knock, one of the biggest knocks on Schneider has been he has not prioritized the offensive line. He's not been good about addressing that position. I think this could absolutely flip that on its ear if those 2 players work out. And I'll also just say, we don't know what Christian Haynes and Satao Lamea are going to look like next year. They're not the answer this year, but I don't think there's any reason to say they'll never be like it took Charles Cross 3 seasons to become the player he is this year. I don't think it's unrealistic to think that one of those 2 guards could end up being a quality starting guard.
I think that's the big deal for him, not those players. I think they need to figure out that interior side of the line, not just because of that quote. It's been a recurring issue for years with the whole Max Unger thing, and the interior offensive line has just not been good for so long. And I think John's been pretty decent with tackles. It's been the interior line. It's been Aaron Donald just like feasted on them for years. He's finally gone. Like, this is so important getting this line figured out. And I think if they can kind of make a jump there, I think it's going to make such a difference. Just
Well, wouldn't it? I mean, I think part of it is they had to build the line from scratch.
exactly.
And if you've got three guys that end up being from these rookie classes that are starters and good starters, then you can start to like patch the remaining spots. It's not, It's a much easier problem to narrow it down to like, okay, one of the rookies has to work out. We need another veteran, blah, blah, blah. So I guess like I won't go too long on the draft, but I'll just say Jackson Smith-Njigba is already third most in receptions and yards of his rookie class, behind Zay Flowers, behind Puka Nacua. With Nakua's injury situation and the way JSN's playing, I'm not so sure that people in a few years won't consider JSN the best receiver in that class. I don't think that's out of the question.
No, it's funny. 2 weeks ago, I had someone write to me like, I can't believe we didn't take Zay Flowers. And listen, I loved Zay Flowers. Like, I identified him.
You did.
I didn't think JSN would even be on the board, but in the last 2 weeks, JSN has looked like one of the best receivers, not only in the slot, but in the whole league.
Yeah.
And so you've seen his ceiling like in the last 2 weeks. I don't know I'm so curious to see just how this sustains with DK on the field and what his numbers are like, but you see his upside, and his upside is why I'm so excited about him. I just thought he had the potential to be that like Cooper Kupp 2021 kind of player. And he's kind of different, but we saw that performance the last 2 weeks. He should have won the Rams game with his kind of the way how good he played in that game. And Cooper Kupp in 2021 was like the best player in the league. He was offensive player of the year. They won the Super Bowl. We've seen glimpses of that, and that's his ceiling, and that's so exciting.
A huge addition. Then you've got the cornerbacks and the edge rushers. You drafted Reek Woolen in the 5th round, Pro Bowler as a rookie. I think he is, where did I find him? I think he's like second among cornerbacks in interceptions since he came into the league among the rookies. Devin Witherspoon and Reek Woolen have been back-to-back Pro Bowlers as rookies at one of the most valuable positions at corner. You then have edge rusher Boye Mafe and Derek Hall back-to-back, and both of those guys, Mike McDonald's not exactly the most effusive dude. He said he sees them as all-pro potential players. Like, that's who he sees them to be. I don't know if they're going to reach that, but they've certainly been impressive, and they're still growing and evolving. Byron Murphy Jr. this year, I think we're excited about. Obviously, he's 22. It's going to take a little bit of time to see his full potential defensive tackle, but I don't think anyone's having an issue with that. And so you kind of look at this, Jeff, and I mean, Tyrese Knight I'd throw on that list. We don't know yet, but he looks like he might be a plus starter. I go through this, and I'm like, 3 offensive linemen that look like they could be plus starters, 2 cornerbacks that look like they're plus, like Pro Bowl level starters, 2 edge rushers that look like they're plus starters, a starting inside linebacker that might be a plus starter, maybe the best running back that was taken over the last 3 years, depending on how you view it. That's a pretty sterling draft record over 3 seasons.
And if you want to know John's greatest strength, it is traditionally his talent of identification. And it's what John has such a good reputation in the league for, is his ability to identify like college evaluations. And it was what he kind of rose him up the chain so early in the league. And when these early drafts, a lot of it was alluded to Pete, but once those drafts kind of fell off a cliff as they kind of tried to do things a little differently, it seems like they've gone back to their roots a little bit. And what made them so made their whole team so frustrating in those really dark draft years was the positions they were taking. And to see them shift towards premium positions again, edge rusher, cornerback, offensive tackle, they've seen the return on that. So I don't know if that was a philosophical shift. I don't know if that the state of their roster being so bleak in 21, but that's been a big deal. And so John, the one thing I'll never knock on is his ability to identify college talent. Like the whole Chubb versus Penny thing kind of got away from them. That was a coaching staff versus personnel group war, and I know for a fact the personnel guys wanted Nick Chubb. Brian Schottenheimer did not, and so they've been very good at identifying college talent, making the right evaluations. Now, are they still overdrafting running backs? Yeah, I don't know how much of that was Pete Carroll. I don't know how much like the Zach Charbonnet pick. It looks awful, but this is a big step for them because they need to become that physical team. And so the rosters kind of felt like they've identified talent very well, but there's two skills. There's talent identification and team building. And it all has to come together. And so the last 3 drafts have been great examples of them doing those two in conjunction. The free agency thing is the one that's supposed to tie it all together with the holes. I don't think they've done that well, but I think the drafting, the right positions, they've had the right identifications. I still wish they identified a little more physical at certain spots and they wanted to get a little bigger at certain spots. But like, they haven't pulled out a ton of all pros, but the fact that they got like Boye and Derek Hall in the second round, a position historically, you do not get good defensive ends in the second round. It is a first round and they've pulled 2 pretty good players out of that spot. That's hard to do. Like Boye's first year, everyone's like, this is a waste. And because if you looked at defensive ends that go in the second round, it's a lot of rotational guys that don't really make a difference. And so they've done a great job. They wanted Will Anderson in that draft, so he would have been like that kind of. So I think if you look at those last 3 drafts, especially 22, and now that Kobe Bryant's become a thing, and Abe Lucas in 23, there were some holes in the middle with Charbonnet and Bradford, but you're never going to go through a draft and go hit. So the couple areas I'd like to see them get better at. This is kind of a nitpick, but the day three is like a thing you've talked about a lot. The teams that are doing really well in the draft are finding diamonds in day 3. The Rams have been really good at that in recent years. The Niners last draft, really good at that. Kobe Bryant starting to emerge, Olu. If those guys can sustain, those are feather in John's caps. The first couple days of the draft, John's made a big jump. Now what this team needs to kind of jump is them to have like a team build, more physical, and some of those day 3 hits, which can really combine your whole thing. If Olu... The next 7 games for Olu, this is a big moment for him because Bradford doesn't look like we're going to see a jump there. Mike Morris, Cam Young.
And by the way, you and I were big fans of the Bradford pick.
We were. That was kind of you identify his profile was very unique for a guard. I would pick him again. But those guys are day 3 picks for a reason. It's a roll the dice, which is why we were advocating this year Mason McCormick, who's playing for Pittsburgh, and other guys, because you got to keep throwing numbers at that spot because we went through the numbers a couple weeks ago with all the interior offensive line. It doesn't hit. So overall, you got to give him, John, really high grades on how he's drafted the last years, how they've adjusted. The thing we need to see them get really good is those day 3 picks. But overall, if you go through all those positions and you're like, John's a shitty drafter, you're just missing the boat at this point.
Well, and the reason I wanted to spend a little time there is because to me, 60 to 70% of a GM's eval is draft. Like it is that critical to how you build a team and sustain a team. And John, honestly, like I've been very critical of his drafts from basically 2013 on. And I think one of the biggest differences is that they're not overvaluing need. They're not pushing players up their board. They are not saying, oh, there's only a certain amount of decent defensive ends, so we're going to take LJ Collier in the first round because there's a huge cliff after that. Like that kind of mistake, I'm not seeing that the last 3 years. I think they've made the adjustment, and I give them credit, and I think it's working. So the process, I think, has taken a big step forward, and thankfully the results have as well. So I just think that that's a big deal. But let's talk about the third rail because it fits into this whole thing, Jeff. Like recreating the moment. He was doing his weekly, I think it was a weekly show with like Dave and like Wyman and Bob,
yeah,
right. And everyone was like really like, what's going on with offensive line? And John was a little flippant about it, like everyone wants to know what we're doing, or why aren't we doing something? Trust us, we know what we're doing, and blah blah blah. Whatever he said. But he then, I don't even remember the framing of the question. I just remember like my ears burning when I heard him say, I think interior offensive linemen are overdrafted and overpaid. I don't know. I want to hear what you thought when you heard that. But what I was like, oh no. Because for me, that meant, oh, he doesn't see the problem. Like, he doesn't see it. He doesn't see that there's like, you can decide that these guys are overdrafted and overpaid, but there's just, that's the market right now. And you gotta pay to get somebody. And oh my God, what are we going to be stuck with? Was my initial thought. Do you remember your reaction when you first heard that?
Yeah, I sunk in my chair a little bit. I listened to all those shows, and I had that same reaction. It's like my first thought is like, he's not wrong, but you need a solution. Like, it's like, do you not know what the problem is here? Because me and you went to this free agency specifically, if you remember, we're like, they need to get veteran guards in the building. Like, like they're building this new team. Like, for years, we've kind of identified this offensive line. To hear that quote, it's like, and the problem with this front office over the years is not that coming from them specifically. It's just the way they've approached some positions and free agency. They've had like the smartest guy in the room symptom. And a lot of people get this. It happened like in the NBA with the Raptors with Masai Ujiri. It's like, oh, 3-point shots don't matter. And every team's going to 3 points and they go against it, and they've sunk as an organization since. The Seahawks reeked of smartest guy in the room symptom. And just in some of the positions they were drafting, how they're doing things differently, and they were valuing players differently. And those were a lot of their biggest mistakes. And sometimes the answer is just so obvious right in front of you. And then to hear that quote, it's like, oh, no.
And that has played over and over and over again, especially as the Seahawks offensive line spiraled further and further down again. And it made John come across as out of touch and maybe a little prideful, to your point. And I don't think of him as that, but that's I think how it came across. And everyone's latched onto it. Like, overdrafted, overpaid, overdrafted, overpaid. So I've learned in talking to folks within the organization and kind of understanding the philosophy, a few things that I think can add to the conversation. So I want to add this to the dialogue because I won't say I agree with every part of it, but I think I have a better understanding of how the organization thinks about this. The first part is that they do believe that there is a dearth, like a very small supply of quality interior offensive linemen. And I think we all agree with that. So there's no debates there. I think they also think that that's causing teams to overpay them, like for more than their talent really demands or talent really justifies. And that they're overdrafting them, that they're taking players that maybe are third-round players in the first round to try to address this. So I think that's, in their mind, like at a simplistic level, what it means to say they're overdrafted and overpaid. I think where there's additional information there is that I think you have an organizational philosophy where you want to pay good players. You have a salary cap. When you pay, you want it to be for quality. You want to make sure that you're paying for guys that you think are good players. Additionally, you want to prioritize the highest impact, highest value positions. And I don't think even you and I would say interior offensive line is higher value than tackle, or higher value than defensive tackle, or higher value potentially than cornerback. Like, there's some premier positions, and the market has defined them to be so, where if you combine those two things and you say you want to pay your money, your most money to good players, and you want to allocate it to the most important positions, it's harder to then make the case of like, okay, we're going to knowingly pay too much money for a guy we know is not that good, but at least he's better than this other crappy player. That, I think, is part of where they get to, of this notion of we got to be careful with our money, and we've got to be thoughtful about where it goes. That might not be the place to put it. So curious your thoughts when you hear that.
So on one hand, these are things we've talked about. Me and you did a lot of free agency shows, a lot of off-season shows, and the one thing we talked about was similar to exactly what you're explaining. We were saying do not pay Damian Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
He is the kind of player you don't. The worst thing you can do in a salary cap world is pay too much money to good players, great money. And that's how you lose. That's how you become the Raiders or the Jets or things like that. You do not want to do things like that. Look at the Jets, how they tried to build their offensive line this year. 34-year-old Tyron Smith and John Simpson. And the only one that's worked out was the guy they drafted, Joe Tippmann. And we've had these same conversations. You don't want to draft a player out of place. We talked about the LJ Carrier example. You don't want to push up guys in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's your philosophy, then some of their other moves become even more puzzling because you have to adjust to that. So if that's your philosophy, that these average players, why are you not drafting Creed Humphrey or Quinn Miniers when D. Eskridge is in there, when receivers are a dime a dozen? You're going against, if that's your philosophy, then you should be adjusting for that. And you should be taking more shots. And you should be kind of do it any way you can. And they haven't made moves that's reflected that. I have no problem if they don't want to pay a Damian Lewis or a guy $13 million, but you need to have a plan. And your plan might be throwing as much crap against the wall and seeing what sticks, whether that's mid-level free agents, draft. They have not operated as that's their philosophy. They have operated a philosophy that they overlooked that position. And we saw it initially with Bradley Sowell and Jamarcus Webb, and maybe that was Tom Cable, but I don't want to keep coming back to the Creed Humphrey thing because we've beaten up on that. But if your philosophy in that kind of pick, where a guy who everyone thought was a first rounder, no one thought he's being a third rounder, slipped up, is being pushed up the board, or they've had chances at taking guards who we've thought were pretty good, they haven't really gone there. And so I understand, I agree with that philosophy that you don't want to pay for average. That's been we've talked about that for years. It's our philosophy.
Yes.
You don't want to pay, and that was with Shaq Griffin. We started having a conversation.
Yep.
And that turned out to be absolutely correct. That was a horrible free agent move by Jacksonville. So I agree with that. And I'm happy that's their philosophy. But you still need to have an adjustment to that because that's what the market is. And I don't see the adjustment.
So, yeah. So where that translates to me, Jeff, and why I think this advances the conversation a little bit, because I came away with the impression initially when I heard those words that they just didn't value this position. I don't think it's that. Yeah. I think it's much more this Damian Lewis example, which you pointed out. We talked about it. You and I, everyone was freaking out when he signed. You and I were like, thank God, there's no way that guy is worth that much money. Yes, he is playing a decent guard level this year. I'm still glad that they did, like, the process would have been off to pay that much money. And people make the other flawed, like the false logic here of they signed Laken Tomlinson. They should have signed Damian Lewis. Laken Tomlinson, the reason we started there, it cost like $1.3 million. Damian Lewis signed a $53 million deal. What really you're saying is they should have signed Damian Lewis instead of Leonard Williams, because that's the only free agent deal they signed that is even close.
Well, Fant.
To the Dame. What? No, what's that?
No, Fant.
No, it's still from a total money. It's not close. Yeah, I mean, Noah Fant's like $20 million deal. Yeah. So like, yes, an APY, I get what you're saying, but like overall, it's not. You couldn't have signed Damian Lewis for the deal that you signed Noah Fant for. So I think the organization looks at it and says, I'm gonna prioritize defensive tackle over a good defensive tackle over a mediocre left guard. And I think that process is solid. Like, I don't have a problem with that. Where I think, Jeff, the issue starts to come up is what you've been touching on. I think it's positional priority. Like, I think the organization has overvalued some of the skill positions. Now, 49ers, by the way, they do the same thing. Their offensive line coach says, don't pay our linemen. We'll don't overdraft. Spend your money on your skill guys. We'll make it work with you. So it's not just the Seahawks that have this philosophy. And by the way, I think John Lynch and Schneider, like, I think that those two front offices share a lot more DNA than people realize. But I would never draft especially a diminutive wide receiver over a quality interior offensive lineman. I would not do that.
Me either.
And I think that's an issue. I think I would not pay a safety top of the market value instead of investing that in the offensive line. I would not pay aging linebackers, inside linebackers, that level of money instead of investing it in the offensive line. So I think I kind of can see now a little bit more their perspective of like, even Bobby Wagner at an advanced age is a better player than Damian Lewis is at guard. So I'm going to give him money, or I'm going to give Jordan Brooks money, or I'm going to give like whatever. But to your point, Jeff, if you don't adjust here, if you don't find another way to address that, and you just think you're going to outsmart the rest of the market by taking the worst of what's already a shit position group in the NFL, you are dooming your quarterback. You are dooming your running back. You are dooming your offensive coordinator and offense in general. Like, you cannot function that way. And I think my understanding is they also just still believe if you're going to have a position that is a little bit less that you can give some help to, interior offensive line is one of the positions in the league that you can kind of, quote, hide. You can kind of give them like ways to help. So far, that has not panned out for them.
Yeah, it's hard to make that comparison. Like, I know that probably is a philosophy, but like, look at the Chiefs. They lost that Super Bowl. They've actually not invested very much in tackle. They've invested in the interior guys, and they've gotten really good returns on that. And we talked about some of the best built offensive lines. What the Packers have done is just great talent identification. A lot of first and second round picks. Tampa Bay, same kind of thing. And they had chances to take these spots, and they took running backs. And the problem with the interior offensive line, I know you can't historically find guys in the third, fourth, fifth round, but they just haven't hit on them. And I get that's their philosophy, but it impacts other investments. It impacts a Kenneth Walker. Like, we saw Geno's numbers, what happened in the end of 2022 when the pressure numbers started ramping up. He was a much less effective player. Same in 23. Like, they couldn't score in the red zone because they were just allowing immediate pressure. We've seen it this year, where their offensive line's been as bad interior before the last game as any group we've seen. And that's where John Schneider's numbers, I think 70%, like that number, I think that all comes from offensive line. I think coming out of that Rams game where the offensive line couldn't get the third and fourth and one, and they allowed instant pressure all day to Jared Verse, and it's like, we're doing another year of this, and we hadn't seen Lucas yet, we hadn't seen Olu yet. Like, we're like, we need to fix 4 or 5 spots, and this is the guy who's going to do it. I think that's where that all comes from. And so I don't think John's wrong in his philosophy, but there has to be a solution to the problem. I know you want to hide, but it hasn't worked. It's been years. And so, like, other than Damian Lewis, like, Mike Iupati has been pretty solid, but like, that's the kind of player I think they need. Like, I thought they got good returns out of Iupati and Fluker, and even one year out of Sweezy when he came back. Like, I think they need to throw more solutions. Like, just throwing Lake and Tomlinson left guard with no backup plan this year was like, it's lucky it's been okay. And like, the right guard thing, they threw Haynes and they had LeMaya, but the center position just, over the years, it's been handled so poorly. And it's hard for me to kind of sympathize with that when I just don't think they've addressed it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you and I see that the same way. I wanted to, add some context there because I think it's helped me at least exhale a bit on the fact that it's not like they don't think that that position's valuable, but that it's about positional priority. And so I don't want them, like you said, I don't want them to pay average players top of the market dollars. I just don't want them to do that, period. I do want them to get some higher floor veterans in those positions. And I do want them to try to get some multi-year deals because continuity is another thing here, Jeff. Like, getting a new person at left guard or right guard every single year is no way to do it. So I think they need to find a way to get some continuity there. But we got a good super chat here from Brandon on this topic. Brandon Schuler says, how different would our record be with Damian Lewis starting this year instead of Bradford? Would it have significantly raised our ceiling as a team? What's your take there, Jeff?
I think they probably win the Rams game. I think if they could have one more competent lineman, they could probably get one of those 1-yard plays. I think that's it. I think that's really it. I don't think the Niners game or the Lions game where they just got pushed around on defense and the Giants game where they just didn't show up at all, I don't think any of those games would have been impacted. So really, I think they probably win the Rams game, and that's probably it. That's probably the difference.
Yeah, and I see this comment from Adis the Gamer says, I honestly don't have a problem overpaying a bit for interior linemen. I just want to reiterate this because I don't think it's gonna take a while for this to sit with people or stick. It's not as simple as overpaying for an interior lineman, for an average lineman. That means that you're not getting someone else at a position that is good. So you're basically saying, I want to overpay for an average guard in order to have a lesser defensive tackle or a lesser cornerback, or not sign Abe Lucas to an extension at tackle, or not sign one of these Ernest Jones at inside backer. Like, you got to be careful. Like, it's easy as a fan to say, well, they should absolutely overpay to get their guards. But as soon as you overpay any position, it means you are not able to get those dollars to another position, not even just free agency, but as an extension to players you want to sign. So spending bad money, like good money on bad players, is not a recipe to rebuild a roster. So I think that's where you and I see it exactly the same way as the team. I think where you and I see it differently is positional priority about how to attack. What's a real problem for the rest of the league too is how to figure out how to field some good interior offensive linemen.
Yeah. I think the worst thing you could do is start throwing like $20 million a year went to Robert Hunt this year. Like, if they had $20 million a year locked in at that guy, like, I don't know how much better the team is. And in a salary cap world, every dollar you spend, every move you make is interconnected.
Yeah.
So you have to spend big expenditures wisely. And they got rid of some of those safety contracts to shift their money towards Leonard Williams. And there's going to be more. The next year, they're going to have to cut some people to open up room. But if you look at those next 2 years, they really have the cap room and the roster space to build the roster in any way they want. And it's starting with these draft classes. There's not a lot of money tied up. So they have some big decisions coming up. But I don't think the solution is signing a bunch of Damian Lewis's. I think it's why we've identified that mid-tier and why we've wanted to throw those second and third round picks at that spot. And so the process-wise, Christian Haynes is a fine process pick. But I don't think other years they've done that. And that's where, like, we were so crushed last year in the second day in 23, where we thought, okay, we built the tackles, we built some other key spots. Let's address that interior offensive line. You love Cody Mauch. They could have had that guy. We love Schmitz. Joe Tippmann was a guy we liked a lot. So they didn't do that. And Derek Hall turned out to be a good player. Charbonnet, no. And we would like them to see keep throwing numbers at those spots.
Yes.
And that's what the Rams have done. And like Bo Limmer this year, they got him in the 5th or 6th round. He's outplayed. They spent a ton of money on Jonah Jackson, who's been a bust for him. He was a guy me and you liked. His number got way higher.
Yeah, I like Jonah Jackson a lot.
We both did. And John's probably sitting there like, Jonah Jackson got 17, 18 million a year, and he's now on the bench.
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to do that? No. But they also drafted Bo Limmer, who's starting. And he was good against the Seahawks.
But this is a perfect example. Like, if you had signed a linebacker, switching gears for a second, you signed a linebacker to a top deal, a multi-year deal, right? Let's say Patrick Queen, maybe a bad example, but you spent that dollar, and maybe Mike McDonald knew that he wasn't exactly the right guy, but in any event, you sign that deal, and he ends up not being as good as Tyrese Knight for whatever reason. Now you've committed that money, and it's spent. And you don't have the ability, the flexibility, where now in the linebacker thing that got so much, hate, I think the Seahawks are in a much better position now with a 24-year-old Ernest Jones and a 23-year-old Tyrese Knight, that they are going to be set at that spot for the next 3 years. if they had signed a multi-year deal to a linebacker, I think they'd be in a worse spot right now than they are. So I think people like, and your point about the draft picks as well, like, yes, would have loved to have drafted Cody Mauch or whatever, but maybe if that means you don't draft Derek Hall, would I make that trade-off? I don't know. That's a tougher call. Would I do it if it was an option at the Zach Charbonnet pick? 100%. But he wasn't available at the Zach Charbonnet pick. He was picked earlier. So I think the process again is I don't want to see running backs in the second round back-to-back years. I don't want to see it. How much of that was John? How much of that was Pete? I would wager Pete had a lot to say about that. So last thing we'll say about John, and then we'll move on to some of our other topics. The other thing that I think people don't seem to include in their evaluation of him is if you got an 83% approval rate for Mike Macdonald, who do you think hired the guy? That was not an easy decision. There are so many weaker minded GMs that would have just been like, okay, Mike Kafka, like Andy Reid likes him. We're going to hire you. Patrick Graham, we've got some experience with you. Like, would have not waited for Macdonald and held their water to be able to make that move. And then, by the way, he didn't just pick Mike Macdonald. Macdonald picked him. The number one reason that Mike Macdonald said that he chose this job was because of his chemistry with John Schneider and because of what he heard from around the league about John Schneider. So if there wasn't a John Schneider here, there would not be a Mike Macdonald here. And so, again, this is my kind of, I'm a contrarian. Like when everyone's saying he's not doing a good job, I want to say, whoa, hold up. I think people are caught up in the moment and not seeing the full picture. I think John Schneider's doing a good job. I could even make the case he's doing a very good job, but he's got some specific areas where I want to see things done differently. I think that's a much more nuanced conversation. That's why it doesn't really make the rounds, right?
Yeah, I think the thing we were all most encouraged by was just the Seahawks process and the head coaching search was excellent and a great reflection of Schneider. And I think you wrote about this in your column. And one of the reasons Macdonald came to Seattle, the distance, he was an East Coast guy, was to work with Schneider and the reputation. So a lot of people unfortunately focus, and it's so easy for us, will focus. The GM's job is just to identify and pick players. That's a part of it for sure, and that's the easiest thing for us as fans to evaluate. But his job is to run the building and to how you treat your staff, how you identify personnel people, how you identify coaches. That is the big part. There's a lot of good talent evaluators out there, but they can't run a team. Or there's a lot of good, there's a lot of good offensive coordinators that can't be a head coach. And John, from all indications, the way he treats people in the building, the way he builds up people, the way they've done things. Yeah, I have a lot of issues with his football side, but I think that being a GM, you're running the entire building. And that's recruiting coaches. And their first shot at getting a coach of his choice, I thought he identified Mike Macdonald and Ben Johnson. Those were the two finalists. I think those were the two best guys on the market. And they landed the guy over Washington, who had a lot more to offer, the number 2 pick. He could have worked with Jaden Daniels and built a team from scratch. And a lot of guys would have picked Dan Quinn. And a lot of Seahawks fans would have hated it. And that might have been the better move. Who knows? But a lot of GMs tend to pick guys they know or guys they've worked with. It's a very common, it's like you've been a manager in other roles. A lot of people do that. And I thought John was at his best during that coaching search. He was patient. He was thorough. He was willing to kind of take some shots from like the list that came out of the first round was not a great list. And had Macdonald gone to Washington, I don't know who he would have gone with. I don't know if it was Kafka. I don't know if it was Quinn. But I thought the process was really, really good. I think Macdonald is still an excellent coaching prospect. I think I have questions about his staff moving forward, but I think you're right. I think you can't really be like, well, John doesn't know how to run a building, but the coach he got is great. Like, I don't think Jody Allen was there picking Mike Macdonald. Like, that's on John Schneider being patient enough to wait until that late in the process. A lot of people rush those decisions. I remember talking you through this whenever it's like, well, why are they not interviewing Macdonald? And like,
I was so frustrated.
You were so mad. And I was mad too because I didn't understand that rule. but a lot of people rush these processes. Like we saw Atlanta, like they didn't want Raheem Morris to interview in Seattle, and they hired him that day. Like I don't know, like I would have rather waited that out. But Raheem Morris has done a fine job. But yeah, I think that was John at his best. Because again, we can always focus on the roster moves, but that's just a part of being a GM and the part we can evaluate. People miss the other stuff.
Well, I'm curious. Tell us in chat if we moved the needle on your perspective on John Schneider one way or another. In this last hour we've spent debating this topic, we went deep on John Schneider. I think he's worth it. I think the topic's really important for Seahawks. We've got some other topics to cover. Before we do, make sure you give the show a like and click subscribe. And I want to remind folks, if you haven't already, head on over to jkboots.com. Use promo code HawkBlogger. Gets you 10% off. Right now, it may not get you 10% off because I think there's like 40% off deals going on, but it does get you a chance to win a Seahawks themed pair of boots. I think it's like blue and gray bison leather. They're really amazing. And also helps contribute to the Wildland Firefighters Foundation. We've already donated 2 pairs to Wildland Firefighters to keep the Northwest Forest safe and dry, or at least not on fire. And we'd like to do more. So every purchase goes to help that. And I'll just show these again for people that didn't see them. I got my pair yesterday. They are gorgeous. I wish you guys could smell these. It smells so good. And I wish you could feel them. They're incredibly comfortable. They're really like hefty. And I am an orthotic wearer. I don't know if anyone else has, foot issues, but they told me do not wear your orthotics, and the boot will kind of form to your arch. I can already tell, like, they are incredibly supportive. These are things that people wear as construction workers, as plumbers, as loggers, as firefighters. These are things that will really last and are made in here in Washington and Spokane. So make sure you get yourself a pair. I think you'll love them. Use code HawkBlogger at jkboots.com. All right, Jeff, it's time. It's time. We can't wait any longer. I know you've been dying for this to happen. Here it comes.
Time to rise and shine, it's clear. HB Morning's voicemail's here. Lay and laugh, let go of fear. Start your day with cheer, my dear.
All right, Jeff, we got voicemail. One for us today. This comes from Brandon, and here it is.
Hey, Brian, before my question, I just wanted to give you a shout out. Thank you so much for the questions that you ask at press conferences. I think it's very refreshing to have a passionate fan asking questions, and I just really, really appreciate that from you. So my question is for you and Jeff on Seahawks Saturdays. I want to know what you guys think the Seahawks are going to do with Geno Smith next year, and if that's what you want the Seahawks to do. Thanks again.
All right, Jeff. What do you think the Seahawks are going to do, and what do you want them to do?
This is a complicated one for me. What I think the Seahawks are going to do is they're going to try to play out the final year of his deal. I'm probably in the same boat. I know it's going to piss him off. And I know probably everyone I want to see what happens in the last 7 games with better protection. I thought last week was a big step. That was one of the questions I asked. Can he win in San Francisco? Can he win that game? This year he had not answered. He played very well, but he had not answered a lot of my questions. I really like Geno. I want to see what happens the last 7 games. They play a lot of good teams. They play a lot of division games. I don't want to go back to the well, but because of his age, I'm not rushing to extend the guy. I think he's a really good quarterback. I think if they had a better infrastructure, meaning an offensive line and a run game, I'd be far more likely to extend him. But if they don't have the infrastructure to help him as he gets older, then I don't think it's a great investment. So I'm still in wait-and-see mode on a lot of their team building, which is why I'd probably let the last year play out. Now, if I'm Geno's side, he's going to be pissed. I heard him on with Sherman the other day. He probably wants his money. If he had more games like the one he had Sunday, how he won that game, even though he didn't play great, he has a pretty good case to get paid a little more. So I'm guessing John Schneider would ideally like to wait and see. I don't know if you can actually do that, but that's how I would handle it.
Yeah, I think it's one of the harder things to prognosticate right now. I definitely agree the last part of the season is going to have a lot to say in it. It would be a pretty clear thing to me that they'd want to make him play out his contract. Like from a purely like take the person out of it and you just look at it like coldly as a team management, 34-year-old quarterback, you have him on an affordable contract. He's got no leverage. He can sit out, but you're like, okay, we'll play Sam Howell. Fine. That might not be good for you if that happens. So they make him play out that deal. Even if he then plays amazingly, they could choose to use a franchise tag on him after that, and that would be his year 36th season. Yeah. So they have some control over the situation that they have a lot of leverage, I guess is what I would say. But on the other side, Jeff, they've got some cap issues to solve next year. It would be beneficial to the team to be able to sign Geno to an extension if they think they want him around for at least the next couple of years. They would benefit from doing that. I think what they try to do is sign him to a shorter extension, like maybe a 2-year extension, and that they give him good dollars. They're not going to give him 50 or 60, but I think in the 40 range. And that will help them clear some cap space up to do other moves. And that is a perfectly fine thing to do. I think that's probably the best outcome is a 2-year, maybe it's a 3-year extension that's really a 2-year extension. That kind of thing is what I'm expecting to happen.
Yeah, like I you heard my answer, so I wouldn't have gripes with that. The problem the Seahawks ultimately, if they do, like say John's just like, I don't want to pay this dude, like what's the solution? The Seahawks aren't going to be drafting. It's a bad quarterback draft. The Seahawks aren't going to be drafting very high. I think they're going to be drafting somewhere in the middle. There's not like a free agent that's coming out, or there's not like an under the radar guy you could trade for. So unless you think like, okay, we'll just plop Howell in and see where we are, what's the solution? So they're in a tricky spot, and like ideally they do draft someone in the next year or two. But yeah, I think your answer is probably the most realistic. I think they're going to try like hell to keep him on the last year of his deal, though.
Yeah. They've got. I mean, the Seahawks are in a pretty good position to negotiate, is what I would say, and it'll just be interesting to see what Geno Smith was pretty reasonable last time, and we'll see how he feels this time around. All right, next thing I wanted to do for you, Jeff, the run game. Like here, oh my God! So a few weeks ago, it was the run defense. You and I were like, I don't care if they lose like 500 yards in the air passing on defense. Just stop the friggin' run. Like, stop it. And they did it. Out of almost nowhere, they did it.
Well, and 13 helped.
Yeah, he did. The run defense looks really good. Okay. The defense in general is looking really good. The pass game has some things you'd like to see, but the pass protection looks improved. The next domino to fall, Jeff, is the run offense. And it has been brutal, man. It's been bad. And so what I want to play for you, I asked Ryan Grubb and I asked Mike McDonald basically the same question. What I asked them was, for Ryan Grubb, I said, how do you approach kind of this paradoxical situation where if you may feel like you need to commit to the run in order to get some repetition and get better at it, but you're not very good at it, versus feeling like you need to get good at it in order to commit to doing it. And I'm going to play for you what he said. Let me bring it up here so we can watch and listen to Ryan Grubb answer that question.
A little bit of needing to decide when to call a run play when the running plays aren't working that well, but you need to run in order to get better at it.
Oh, I think there certainly is that can be a tough proposition at times. I think you're playing the whole game into account, meaning, where's the clock at? What's the score? How's the defense playing? How much time do we have to use? And then there's a point in time where, certainly some games early in the year where we got behind and we had to let the pass game take over a little bit. And those are the times that you get excited thinking about what the offense can do, and you can create some of that balance, and teams don't know what's about to happen. So it's just a management every series, honestly. You're really evaluating exactly where you're at, what's going on with the time of possession, things like that, and at the same time, knowing calls you've made and things that you want to try to change in the narrative of the game. So there's certainly a spirit of that is a chess match that you love, that's really fun and sometimes really frustrating.
So that is Ryan Grubb's answer. I then asked, Mike McDonald kind of framed it as a chicken and the egg scenario. Which has to come first? Do you commit to the run game, or do you have to get good before you commit? And here is his answer. Curious, like the chicken and egg situation of, do you have to commit to running the ball to get good at it, or do you have to get good at it to commit to running the ball?
I think you got to commit to it. Yeah, you're going to get what you emphasize. So, I think that one's pretty straightforward.
All right, Jeff. Did you hear the same thing, or did you hear different things from those two guys?
Oh, my alarm bells are going up in my head right now. I heard very different things. McDonald was very cut and dry. That last part, it's straightforward in his mind. Grubb gave a lot of fluff, and he just talked in circles and gave a lot of coach speak. And really, I think he sensed the opposite of what McDonald. I think he sensed you run when you're good at it, but every situation is different. And so I heard that's been consistent with something I've been hearing the last few weeks. Kind of some comments from McDonald where I've been wondering about Grubb. And I think that one is where I hear them saying two totally different things.
I think that, again, I will reiterate, all Seahawks fans should be rooting like heck for Grubb and McDonald to get on the same page, find whatever's going to work on offense, for Grubb to make the adjustments necessary. That is by far the best outcome. You do not want to go back to the well for another offensive coordinator and potentially another offensive line coach. That is not a good thing. Oh my God, I'm just seeing two bobcats walk in my front yard. I haven't seen two of them together. That's pretty cute. Oh my gosh, there's three. There's a little baby bobcat.
No
That's
way.
adorable. I wish you guys could see this. Anyway, I think it was the most clarity was Mike McDonald. You got to commit to it. And I think that's part of, if I was to guess, that is probably the number one frustration he has with what's going on. And people can say, well, Mike McDonald's got it. He's right. How did people feel after that 49ers game in week 6 when the Seahawks came out and just kept ramming their head against the wall, running the ball, even though it wasn't working, averaged 2 yards a carry, and just were ineffectual? And every time they're doing that, they're not throwing the ball to JSN. They're not throwing the ball to DK Metcalf. They're not doing other things that, frankly, they're better at. So what I hear from Ryan Grubb is, I asked him a little bit about it earlier. He's he sees the vision of he's dying to have the point where they have enough balance that defenses don't know what's coming. He said that. And he did say at the end, it's frustrating. He's frustrated. My understanding from the team is that there's been a little bit of mismatch of what the offensive linemen are good at, what the running backs are good at, and what the coaches are coaching. I don't think on the run scheme that everything's been lined up. I think that they've made some adjustments coming out of the bye week. I think that San Francisco was the first go of it. I thought there were some signs of some progress there. But this next 7 weeks, one of the biggest question marks, Jeff, is have they figured out a way to be more effective on the ground? And this weekend is a perfect opportunity to test that question.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. I've been wondering. I've always just put all the blame, just the offensive line sucks. They can't run block. That's the problem. Now Abe Lucas is back, probably their best run blocker. But frankly, they lost the Rams game because they couldn't gain a yard in the ground game. They almost lost the 49ers game because they got stuffed again. 3rd and 4th and 1, couldn't get a yard. And so if you want to be this Mike McDonald physical team built like the Ravens, you got to be able to run the ball. That's what Michigan was all about. And that's where it's it all comes back to well, why, if you want to run the ball, why are you not good at guard? But this is going to be a real interesting because they couldn't get those 1 yards in back-to-back games when they tried to run the football. And again, I've been critical of Grubb because I think when they get into these short yardage situations, they get so vanilla. And fourth down again, they stack the box, they give it to Charbonnet and say, like, try to get a yard. That's not how. It's not what he was great at, and I think he's kind of just been like, okay. But a lot of numbers have shown you're actually more effective running the ball in short yardage if you spread everyone out, because then you take defenders out of the box. And again, 4th and 1 at the end of the game a couple weeks ago in the Rams, they bring everyone into the box and have Walker try to go off tackle to a side they're not great run blockers. So, yeah, I hope their scheme, but I want to see them get a little more creative. I want to see them play to their strengths. And I thought one of the best examples was near the goal line when Walker scored a touchdown. They brought Jalen Sundell in at fullback. And it worked really well. I thought it was a really smart play. And Walker had a pretty easy hole where he just had to beat one guy. And I think what's been happening in their short yardage is they've gotten really vanilla. And, like, we all remember the Roma Dunze play. I'm not saying you need to do that with, like, Laviska Shenault every time, but they ran, like, a really cool play last week where Smith and Jigba came across the line of scrimmage and took an end around, and it worked really effectively. And so I would like to see them get a little more creative. I thought in that Denver second half when they really won the game, they had a lot of motion with guys coming across the line of scrimmage, which was opening up run holes. And Kenneth Walker looked phenomenal that game. And I think they've kind of lost that. So I hope they can scheme a little better. I think they can get a little more creative, especially in short yardage, and just play to your strengths. So I think Grubb has been very vanilla in short yardage all year, and I know you've talked about that. I'm hoping that gets a little better, or they start playing, because we've seen those 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, game on the line kind of plays. They've botched them the last 2 games. So this needs to get better. It's been a huge issue with what their team's doing. To me, obviously, if the guards could just win at the point of attack, that would be great, but I don't think they have that. And this is why it all comes full circle to the conversation we just talked about. So I think that's a big step. You see so many teams around the NFL right now, like the return the Eagles have gotten with Saquon, and Baltimore with Derrick Henry, because they have the infrastructure to run the football. Seattle, I don't think, does. And so if they can make a coaching adjustment, if they can make a personnel adjustment going into the offseason, this needs to get better, because this helps everything they do on offense.
Yeah, I even wonder, I think they've been a little left-handed with their running game too.
Yeah.
They tend to go behind Cross and Laken Tomlinson. And I mean, if Bradford should be able to do anything, it should be able to, like, get a push
guys off the line.
Right. But now with Abe Lucas back, I do wonder if that's going to change their calculus a little bit. He's their most physical blocker on that line. I'm curious what that'll look like. And I think somebody that does not get any criticism but deserves a little bit is Kenneth Walker. I don't think, like, 90% of the time it's not his issue.
Yeah.
But there are plays every game, multiple plays every game, where there's 3 to 4 yards to be had, and he's bouncing it outside, trying to get something more instead of just hitting it up into the hole. And he's not the only running back to do this. Marshawn Lynch used to do this. He and Tom Cable had a famous, like, coming together that changed Marshawn Lynch's career and the Seahawks, like, run game forever, when he's just like, you got to hit this spot at this time. That's how it's designed to work. And Lynch finally relented and things really took off. Kenneth Walker bounces things too much and does not just take the 3 yards. So he's been part of the problem as well. So
Totally.
I just think there's a lot of, like, Mike McDonald talked about the run defense as a puzzle. And you and I were joking, like, the pieces are scattered to the ends of the earth. Like, they're not going to come together anytime soon. And then magically they did. Part of it was personnel, part of it was scheme. Now you've got Oluwatimi and Abe Lucas, different personnel. 40% of your offensive line's different. And you've got potentially some scheme changes. I'm hoping, I'm not saying it's going to be just like it was on defense, but I am hopeful that we might see just a little bit of improvement there. And that if you can get 25% more out of your run game than you are right now, I think you're a very different offense. And I think you're a lot less unreliable than you've been. So wanted to highlight that. Let's we're already at 2 hours. You got more time, buddy?
Yeah, a little bit. Okay.
All right. We'll take a couple minutes to talk about this Cardinals game. We'll get our picks in. So what's your take on this game? What do you see in this matchup?
This is a really interesting matchup because the Cardinals, they have talent deficiencies in a lot of spots on defense. They've invested a lot in some of their skill players, but they're very clear in what they are and how they want to play. They run out of heavy formations. They get Trey McBride out there. They get Tipper Ryman out there. They get big, and they can run the ball down your throat. James Conner has crushed the Seahawks in like the last 4 or 5 games.
Mm-hmm.
You add to that what Kyler can do, and then defensively, they are talentless basically everywhere except for Budda Baker. But they really maximize what they have with scheme and good coaching. And so we talk about like knowing who you are, having a vision. I have had admired the Cardinals in a lot of ways. Kyler's played better than I've given him credit for. He's like 3rd in QBR this year. He's a really hard guy. He drives me crazy because you're so close to tackling him and he just slips away. But this is a really good game because there's ways Seattle can take advantage of them. So, I'm looking, can Seattle stop the run against these guys? Because they've done it against 2 teams that are really good against the run. If they could do it against these guys too, that's 3 really impressive games in a row. Ken McDonald knows these guys pretty well. He played them last year. He said he knows the coordinator from Cleveland. He should have pretty good intel on them. So I'm really curious how they attack them. And then I think there's going to be shots for Seattle in the passing game because they don't have much of a pass rush. They're schematically very good, which could confuse their O-line, but this is a game they can get. So I don't know how good the Cardinals are because I love how they're playing, but their big wins came against Chicago in the midst of all their flux and the Jets, who are a complete mess. They just fired their GM. So I'm just curious. I don't know. I'm curious, how good is Arizona? How does Seattle match up? This is a game where, like, I don't have a great read for it, to be honest. I don't know how good the Cardinals are. I don't know whether the Seahawks are a good match or a bad match for them. I'm just very eager to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope you've dug into the tape. Like, I've been really impressed with the Cardinals coaches.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like, this is just, to me, like, last week is kind of one step. Now this is the next step. Like, can they build off that? Can they do what McDonald says, stack wins, stack games? Like, this is a really intriguing matchup to see how good is the Arizona. If Seattle can push them around, do they get pushed around? How does it look? Like, we're going to learn a lot from this week.
Yeah, I that's part of why I'm excited about the game. Sometimes you get excited because it's, there's so much on the line, or because, you think you're going to blow them out, or like whatever. I'm excited because we're going to learn again about the coaches, about the players, about offense, about defense, so many things in this game. And early in the season, or at least the middle part of the season, a lot of what we were learning was very troubling. And so it was like, oh no, I don't know what I want to, I don't want to learn what I'm learning right now. But I'm back to anticipating these games. And I will say this, I think the Cardinals are I think they are a good team. I don't think they are a great team, but I think they're very solid. I don't think anything's going to come easy against them. I think that you're going to have to earn every yard on offense. I think you're going to have to really strain on defense. I think Kyler Murray is kind of this wild card with his home run ability as a runner. And I think the Seahawks have not necessarily been great in defending scrambling quarterbacks, but they did do better against Purdy, I would say, in this last game, even though he did have a couple breakout scrambles. I want to see what happens there, but part of what I'd say I'm most interested in, like the number one thing I want to see, Jeff, is I want to see that this run defense 3 weeks in a row against 3 very good run offenses can show up. If they do that, I mean, I will say if they lose the game, I'm going to be annoyed. But if they show up and they like shut down the run game again, that will be a really good harbinger of what's to come for the Seahawks down the line. From there, I feel much more confident about the Seahawks defensive matchup in this game. I think the secondary matches up really well with the Cardinals receivers. Trey McBride will be an interesting test, as you said, because I don't know that we really have faced a good tight end like that since Sam Laporta, and that was a very different defensive Seahawks team. But I like the matchup on defense. I'm wondering about the offensive matchup. They should haven't like the Cardinals are the 30th ranked pressure rate team in the NFL. The other times the Seahawks have played defenses that were that low in pressure rate was the Falcons, the Patriots, and the Lions, quite honestly. And they threw the ball all over the park against those teams. So we'll see with the weather. It's supposed to be raining potentially. I don't know that Arizona is built for the rain. And I don't know. Let's get your picks in, man. I got to get you back to the rest of your Saturday. So tell me, with all that, what do you think is going to happen this game? What's the final score?
I went all week thinking I was going to take Arizona. I just think they're such a physical team. And then I saw their main YouTube show, and all 4 experts picked the Cardinals, and I got instantly very annoyed. And so I'm gonna go the other way. I think this is a Mike McDonald game. I think he's gonna really show his mettle in this game. I think they're gonna be able to scheme around this offense. I think he knows these guys from Cleveland. I think the Seahawks are gonna pull out a close win, and I think it's gonna be a tough game. I think it's gonna be physical. I think there's going to be some adversity. I say Seattle wins 27-24.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm putting my streak on the line again. I think I've got 4 in a row, and the only games I haven't picked correctly this year are Detroit and New York. I do think this is a tough one to pick.
I have no feeling.
I really like where the Seahawks are. I like the way that they've been playing defensively. I think when you're playing that kind of defense with the talent that they've got, and you're starting to see Devin Witherspoon emerge, it's another good sign that the scheme is starting to settle in and it's starting to let the playmakers make plays. And I think Rayshon Jenkins coming back is a bigger deal than people realize. I think it's a great game to have a in the box safety who can help fill against the run. If you're going to have a defense like that, you're in every game. And the fact that they've lost 4 in a row at home, I just think this team is eager to come out and play this style of game. I think the Cardinals are going to be really tough, but in the end, I think the Seahawks are going to win this one. I'm going to say the Seahawks are going to win 24-17 and keep another team in the NFC West, the third straight team, under 20 points in regulation. So that's what I've got happening in this game. Tomorrow morning, we will have a crossover episode of Griff Sturgeon and Rob Staten, 8 a.m. Pacific time. We'll do a pregame show, so make sure folks tune in for that. Jeff, I will let you get on with the rest of your day. I got a couple super chats I got to get to, and then we'll go from there. So Real Jeff Simmons, follow him. Great to see him today. Let me get to some of these super chats before we go. A lot of them are from Garth, which I always appreciate. Garth Knight says, Tom Cable punched a coordinator's teeth out after beating up on Pete's Seahawks. That's why Pete hired him. John hired Mike after getting wrecked by the Ravens. It's not rocket science. Gotcha. Then Garth says, Taylor swing next hit will be salary cap world. I'm not sure what that means. And then we've got from Garth, Jody Allen picked Michael McDonald, according to my sources. Granted, she thought it was the Doobie Brothers lead singer, but we've got one from Nate Schutz here, who's been a member for 3 months. Thank you for supporting the show that long, Nate. Says, are we just one good interior offensive lineman away from contending? I don't think we are. I think a lot of other things have to start clicking. Really, to start talking about contending, you've got to be able to do things every single week that become, you just rely, where it's the exception that you are not a excellent defense that day, where it's the exception that you're not able to run the ball that day. There's some things that they need to do that it would mean that they're, truly contenders, and they have to have some strengths that are potentially the strongest in the NFL. Like, what are they best at? Better than any other team in the NFL. You could make the case the 49ers in past years were the best at certain things. You can definitely make the case that the Chiefs have been the best at certain things. The Ravens have been the best at certain things. You can't just be good to be a contender. You have to be the best at least a few things in order to be a contender. I don't think the Seahawks are particularly close to saying they're the best at anything. I think that the interior offensive line could be part of the recipe to get there, but I don't think it's quite that simple. Great question, though. Garth with one more says, by the way, college football is minor league football. I hope Brian and Jeff agree. I do not agree. Very big differences between college being minor leagues and true minor leagues, including control from the NFL teams over who they keep, how they're coached, who they play, what positions they play, how everything works together. So I think there's a very, very, very big difference. But I understand the general notion that college football is where all of your next generation of players come. So in that sense, it is similar to a minor league. All right, everybody, 2 hours and 10 minutes in. Hopefully you have given the show a like and click subscribe. If you haven't already, we are closing in on 13,000 subscribers. Appreciate your help in getting there. Also, would just remind you again, head on over to jkboots.com, use promo code HawkBlogger. That will get you access to 10% off. Right now, it will not. I think it'll show up as no additional discount because I think there's 40% off deals already happening as the countdown to Black Friday. But it will get you a chance to win a pair of custom Seahawks themed boots and help contribute to the Wildland Firefighters Foundation and help contribute to the show. So I appreciate it. If you take advantage, I told you my boots, I'm loving them. I just got them yesterday. They already feel amazing. I will do my best to not make them look bad because they definitely are cooler than I am. And then I'd also encourage you, if you haven't already, go over to ftnfantasy.com. Promo code HBAM gets you 15% off of the subscription there. That gets you DVOA, that gets you Stats Hub, that gets you the betting model, all the great stuff. That is where I found out yesterday when I was searching around that Kyler Murray's only played in 2 games in his career in the rain. 2 games. One at Green Bay this year, one at the Giants in 2019 as a rookie. This Arizona team is not built necessarily, I think they're built for the rain. I don't know if they are accustomed to the rain. They are a gritty team, but I'll be curious how they show up in that kind of situation, if that is indeed what the weather's like tomorrow. So everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks again to Jeff Simmons. And I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and now Blue Sky at Hawk Blogger. This has been episode 244 of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care, y'all.